Alex, and welcome back to English Class Collective.
And I'm Lucas. We're excited to have you here with us today.
Today, we're going to talk about something that many English learners find really challenging, saying no.
Oh yes, this is such an important topic. You know, Alex, I remember when I was learning Spanish, I always felt bad about saying no to people. I didn't want to seem rude.
That's exactly why we chose this topic. Many of our listeners have told us they struggle with politely refusing requests or invitations in English.
In today's episode, we're going to help you learn how to say no confidently and politely in English. We'll cover different phrases and expressions you can use in various situations.
And we'll talk about setting healthy boundaries, which is really important in both personal and professional situations. Plus, we'll share some cultural perspectives on saying no.
We'll give you lots of practical examples and useful vocabulary that you can start using right away.
And don't worry, we've kept the language at a level that's easy to understand. We'll also have 2 vocabulary review sections and some practice questions to help you remember what you've learned.
So whether you need to turn down an invitation, say no to extra work, or just set better boundaries in your daily life, this episode will give you the tools you need.
And remember, it's totally okay to say no sometimes. We'll show you how to do it in a way that's both clear and kind.
Let's get started with some common situations where you might need to say no and the best ways to handle them.
You know, Lucas, one of the most important things about saying no is being clear but polite at the same time.
Absolutely. I think a common mistake is when people try to be too nice and end up being unclear, like saying maybe when they really mean no.
That's such a good point. Let's give our listeners some practical tips. First, I always start with a positive phrase like, "Thank you for thinking of me," or "I really appreciate the invitation."
Yes, that's perfect. And then you can follow up with your refusal. For example, "Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to attend the party."
Exactly. Another useful phrase is, "I'm afraid I can't." It sounds more polite than just saying no directly.
I use that one a lot at work, like, "I'm afraid I can't take on any more projects right now."
Oh, work situations can be really tricky. Sometimes I find it helpful to give a brief explanation, but not too detailed. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. You could say something like, "I have other commitments," or "My schedule is full at the moment."
And sometimes you might want to suggest an alternative. For instance, "I can't help you today, but I'd be happy to look at this tomorrow."
That's really helpful. You know what else I've learned? It's important not to over-apologize. Sometimes a simple "I'm sorry, but" is enough.
Oh, that's such good advice. I used to say sorry too many times, but now I try to be more direct while still being polite.
Let's share some specific phrases our listeners can use. One of my favorites is, "I wish I could, but..."
That's a great one. And don't forget, "I'll have to pass this time." It's casual, but still polite.
You know what's also important? Your tone of voice. Even the most polite words can sound rude if you say them the wrong way.
Definitely. Keep your tone friendly but firm. And remember, you don't always need to explain why you're saying no. Now, let's review some of the key expressions we've just discussed for saying no politely. I'll give the phrase, and then Lucas will share an example sentence.
Perfect. Let's start with our first expression.
The first one is, "I'm afraid I can't." This is a very polite way to refuse.
Here's an example. "I'm afraid I can't join you for dinner tonight."
Next, we have, "Thank you for thinking of me, but..."
Like this. "Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to make it to the meeting."
Our third expression is, "I wish I could, but..."
For example, "I wish I could help you move this weekend, but I already have plans."
Number 4 is, "I'll have to pass this time."
As in, "Thanks for the invitation, but I'll have to pass this time."
The fifth expression is, "I have other commitments."
Here's how to use it. "I have other commitments that day, so I won't be able to attend."
And our final expression is, "My schedule is full at the moment."
Perfect for work situations. "My schedule is full at the moment, so I can't take on any new projects."
All right, listeners, let's check your understanding with a couple of questions about what we've discussed so far. Get ready to pause the podcast if you need more time to think about your answers.
Here's question number 1. What expression do we use when we want to show appreciation for being invited before saying no?
Take a moment to think about it. Ready? The answer is, "Thank you for thinking of me, but..."
And here's question number 2. Which expression is best to use in a work situation when you're too busy to take on more tasks?
Pause the podcast if you need more time. And the answer is, "My schedule is full at the moment."
Great job, everyone. Let's continue with our discussion about saying no in different cultures. You know, Alex, something I've noticed while traveling is how differently people say no across cultures. It's fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. I actually had an interesting experience when I was teaching English in Japan. I learned that saying a direct no is often considered too harsh there.
Really? How do they handle it?
They often use what we call soft refusals. Instead of saying no, they might say something like, that could be difficult, or I'll think about it.
That's so interesting. It's quite different from American culture, where we're usually encouraged to be more direct.
Exactly. In my Japanese workplace, I had to adjust my communication style. One time, I directly declined a dinner invitation, and I could tell I made my colleague uncomfortable.
I can relate to that cultural confusion. When I was visiting Brazil, I found that people often say yes or maybe, even when they mean no, just to avoid disappointing others.
That's what we call saving face, right? It's really common in many cultures.
Yes, and it can be quite confusing for English learners. In some cultures, like German culture, being direct is actually considered more respectful because you're being honest.
That's a great point. I remember when my German friend visited me in the States. She was surprised by how we often say things like, we should get coffee sometime, without actually meaning to make specific plans.
That's such a common phrase in English-speaking countries. It's more of a friendly gesture than a real invitation sometimes.
Exactly. And in some Middle Eastern cultures, I've learned that you might need to refuse something multiple times before your no is taken seriously.
That's true. Sometimes an offer might be repeated 3 times, and it's actually polite to refuse twice before accepting if you want to accept.
It really shows how important it is to understand these cultural differences, especially when we're communicating in English with people from different backgrounds.
Absolutely, and it's okay to adapt your style based on who you're talking to. Sometimes being direct is best, and other times a softer approach works better.
I think the key is being respectful and understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to saying no. Let's review some key phrases we discussed about cultural ways of saying no.
First, let's look at that could be difficult. This is a gentle way to refuse without saying no directly.
Right. Here's an example. Can you come to the meeting tomorrow? That could be difficult with my current schedule.
Next we have I'll think about it, which is often used when you want to say no politely.
Like this. Would you like to join the committee? I'll think about it and let you know.
Another useful phrase is we should get coffee sometime. This is what we call a social nicety. It's not always a real invitation.
Yes. And here's an important one. I'm afraid I won't be able to. This is more direct, but still polite.
Perfect example. Can you help me move this weekend? I'm afraid I won't be able to.
And don't forget, I appreciate the offer, but this is a great way to show gratitude while still saying no.
Like this. Would you like to join us for dinner? I appreciate the offer, but I already have plans.
Finally, there's let me check and get back to you. This gives you time to formulate a polite refusal.
These phrases can help you navigate different cultural expectations while staying polite and respectful.
Now let's check your understanding of our cultural discussion about saying no. Here's question number 1. What's the main difference we discussed between saying no in Western cultures versus many Asian cultures?
Please pause the audio now to think about your answer.
The answer is that Western cultures tend to be more direct with refusals, while many Asian cultures often use indirect phrases to avoid saying no explicitly.
Here's question number 2. We mentioned a phrase that Americans often use socially without actually meaning it literally. What was that phrase?
Take a moment to think about it. Pause the audio if you need more time.
The answer is, we should get coffee sometime. Remember, in American culture, this phrase is often used as a friendly way to end a conversation, not always as a real invitation.
How did you do with these questions? Remember, understanding these cultural differences can help you communicate more effectively in English.
Well, everyone, we've covered quite a lot today about the art of saying no in English.
That's right. We've learned that it's not just about the word no itself, but about how to refuse politely and effectively while respecting both ourselves and others.
We've explored some really useful phrases like I'll have to pass and I'm afraid I can't, and we've seen how different cultures approach refusing requests.
And remember, it's perfectly okay to say no when you need to. It's an important skill for setting healthy boundaries in any language.
We'd love to hear about your experiences with saying no in English. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you struggled to refuse something?
Yes, share your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to practice these phrases we discussed today in your daily conversations.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of English Class Collective. Keep practicing and we'll see you in our next lesson.